In a London archive, Alexandra Evely lifts a damaged urn and reads a Danish name that should not be there. Preben Holger Larsen. He was declared gone in 1944, yet the urn survived him by 78 years, holding 2 plaster tags that don't fit any known record. If the label is wrong, someone's grief is wrong, she says. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to outlive your own ending. At Minde, London, Mikkel Larsen traces a name carved for the missing never meant to move. Until now, on the morning it begins, Preben Holger Larsen washes ink from his fingertips until the water runs clear. He uses cold water, the kind that stiffens joints, because it keeps him awake. A thin black line stays trapped beneath one nail on his left hand. He notices it, scrubs once more, then stops. There isn't time to chase perfection today. The mimeograph rollers are already warm when he arrives. He cleans them anyway, methodically, until the rubber squeaks under the cloth. It's a small ritual, almost calming. Ink smells sharp and metallic, mixed with machine oil and damp paper. This is work he understands. Turn the crank, feed the page, listen for the hitch that means something's about to tear. Preben sharpens a pencil down to a needle point and sketches while he waits hands, mostly. Fingers gripping tools, knuckles bent, thumbs pressed flat. He has always drawn hands. They tell the truth faster than faces. During breaks at the factory on Baldersgade, he does the same thing on scrap paper, leaning against a brick wall while the whistle fades. He sketches faces too, but only when no one is watching. Kirsten Holm appears in the doorway, breathless, a grocery bag tucked under her arm. She counts her steps without looking down, lips moving silently. When she reaches the table, she taps twice on the wood. Don't look brave, she says, look boring. Is 99. Preben smiles and flips the sketchbook around. It's a quick caricature of her too, serious, eyebrows exaggerated, mouth set like she's already arguing with someone. She snorts despite herself. You're going to get us killed drawing like that. It's only dangerous if it's good, he says, and slides the paper into the false bottom of her bag. I can't pretend I know what it felt like to live this close to being caught, but I can see the way small habits become armor, counting steps, tapping doors, cleaning rollers until they squeak. Preben keeps a folded pencil sketch in the pocket of his work apron. His sister's profile, drawn years ago at their kitchen table in Silkeborg. She'd leaned over his shoulder, teasing him for drawing too seriously, for pressing so hard the pencil snapped. You'll ruin your hands, she'd said. He'd laughed and promised he wouldn't. He writes her a note now, hurried and cramped, the pencil leaving grooves in the paper. I'll be back. With both hands still mine. He doesn't add anything else. He knows she'll understand the rest. The apartment is cramped, walls close enough to hold the heat. A small paintbrush, wrapped carefully in paper, waits in a drawer. He leaves it there, for later. He always leaves something unfinished. It makes coming back feel real. Outside, the city performs its morning routine. Bicycle chains click. A factory whistle cuts the air. Somewhere, potatoes boil. Steam fogging a kitchen window. Normal sounds, stitched together so tightly they almost feel permanent. The knock comes anyway. It isn't friendly. It's not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, or the hollow thud of a delivery. It's precise. Authority practiced into muscle memory. Kirsten freezes. Preben doesn't look at her. He reaches for the rag and wipes his hands again, slower this time. Hide the rest, he says quietly. She hesitates just long enough to memorize his face. If I see your family, he shakes his head. Go. Say any. The door opens before she reaches it. They take the stacks first. Fresh pages, still smelling of ink, seized in bulk. 50,000 and more, piled like evidence of a life lived too loudly. Preben watches the numbers grow as they count. The way a craftsman watches measurements he can't change. A man in uniform flips through a page, sneers at a cartoon, then tears it in half. Paper rips easily. That's the point. They ask names, he gives them one. Not the one his sister knows. Not the one he signed to his drawings. Later, in a corridor that smells of disinfectant and old smoke, Captain Jürgen Madsen rewrites a list by hand. He presses too hard with the pencil. The ledger already holds names, dates, train departures. He believes order can save lives if he's careful enough. A name is not a body. He tells a family waiting nearby, voice steady. But it's what we have. He promises again that he'll keep them in Denmark. He has promised this before. His thumb blisters from stamping paperwork. He ignores it. Preben moves through rooms that erase detail. Interrogation becomes holding. Holding becomes transfer. Friends become liabilities. He says very little. Each word feels like it might cost someone else a night of sleep, a warm cup of coffee at dawn. In a crowded cell, someone whispers, "Did you warn them?" Preben stares at his hands, fingers flexing. "No," he says. "It isn't the whole truth, but it's the safest part of it. I can't pretend I know what it's like to measure your courage by what you don't say, but I recognize the weight of a decision that looks small from the outside and total from the inside." The train day arrives without ceremony. Captain Madsen stands by a list that shouldn't exist. A name appears where it shouldn't. He hesitates, pencil hovering. "Is this correct?" he asks. A German officer doesn't look up. Next. The promise breaks there, quietly. Madsen closes the ledger and tucks the pencil stubs back into its spine. Preben boards with others, the smell of iron and sweat thick in the car. He presses his hands together, palms flat, as if counting them. He thinks of the vow he wrote. He thinks of tools laid out neatly on a bench. He thinks of a studio that never quite existed. Kirsten spends the night ironing a plain blouse, moving the iron back and forth until the fabric is perfectly dull. She walks routes she's walked before, taps doors she's tapped before, listens for dogs on stair landings. When dawn comes, the coffee is warm. She drinks it anyway. No letter comes, no message. Only rumors, passed like contraband. At Minda, London, years later, Mikkel Larsen will stand with his daughter and read names like rosary beads. But that comes after. For now, the sister waits by a kitchen table, the last envelope with his handwriting tucked into a drawer. She keeps it there, unopened, as if the paper itself might bruise. Preben's world narrows to routines again. Work assigned, hours counted, hands protected as long as possible. He fears for them more than anything else. Hands are identity to a toolmaker. To an artist, they're proof. When he is gone, there is no coffin, no grave. Only a date that settles into records and a name that will be carved into stone, meant for those without one. Somewhere else, a choice will be made that keeps a body moving long after the life has stopped. But here, now, the last normal day ends with ink under a fingernail and a promise written too quickly to erase. And that is how he disappears, not all at once, but step by step, through doors he never meant to walk through, carrying only what he could fit in his hands. The arrest does not end the work. It reorganizes it. Stacks of seized pages are logged, boxed, counted again. Numbers replace urgency. Names are copied from one form to another, until handwriting becomes uniform, stripped of personality. In one report, the scale of the operation is noted with clinical satisfaction. Tens of thousands of illegal publications removed from circulation in a single action. The network is described as larger than anticipated. That phrase travels farther than Preben does. He has moved first to a place with walls he can still recognize. Interrogation rooms smell of stale coffee and sweat, of fear disguised as procedure. Questions repeat. Who set the type? Who wrote the editorials? Who carried the bundles north? He answers with care, offering fragments that feel harmless, withholding anything that feels like a door. Names save time, an interrogator says, not unkindly. Preben looks at his hands instead. The skin across his knuckles is already splitting from the cold. He rubs them together slowly, as if warming them might also protect them. Afterward, he is held with others whose faces change daily. One man hums to himself at night, a tune Preben half recognizes from the radio before the occupation. Another counts ceiling cracks until morning. They stop exchanging real details. Too dangerous. Too easy to remember. Kirsten hears of the arrests through a chain of whispers. Someone saw trucks. Someone smelled ink burning. Someone said the print run had been massive, too massive. She walks home past shuttered shops, her grocery bag empty now, and practices saying nothing at all. At night, dogs bark somewhere down the block. She sits on her bed with her shoes still on, waiting for a knock that never comes. Captain Jürgen Madsen receives the first list 2 days later. He rewrites it by hand, as he always does, even though a typed version already exists. The act of copying feels like intervention, like proof that someone is still paying attention. He pauses over Larsen's name. Toolmaker. Art student. Printer. This one should stay, he tells a colleague quietly. The colleague shrugs. Orders changed. Madsen stamps the paper anyway. His thumb aches. He flexes it and keeps going. The transfers begin in stages, designed to look temporary. Holding becomes transit. Transit becomes something harder to reverse. At Horserud, Preben is assigned a number and a bunk. He memorizes the sound of the doors, the way boots echo differently in the corridor depending on who is walking. He writes nothing. There is nothing safe to send. From Froslev, the assurances start to fray. Men who were supposed to remain in Denmark disappear from roll call. Their bunks are stripped clean, as if they were never there. One morning, Preben's name is read aloud. Larsen, Preben Holger. He steps forward. The air smells of wet earth and coal smoke. A guard checks a clipboard, then waves him on. No explanation. No appeal. I can't pretend I know what it's like to be turned into cargo. But I know the sound of finality when a decision is made without discussion. It's quieter than people expect. The transport south is crowded, bodies pressed together, breath fogging the air. Someone whispers that they're being sent to work. Someone else says nothing. Preben keeps his hands tucked inside his sleeves, fingers curled, protecting them from accidental blows. Nuengami strips away the last familiar shapes. Heads shaved, clothes exchanged for stripes. Names replaced by numbers that stick to the skin like grit. He learns quickly which rules are enforced and which are performed for effect. He learns that hunger sharpens memory and blurs time. Within weeks, he is sent onward again, to a place called Porta Westfalica. The name means nothing to him at first. It will come to mean dust. The tunnels are cut into sandstone, narrow, and dark. Work stretches 12 hours or more, measured by exhaustion rather than clocks. Air is thin. Cement dust coats tongues and throats. Light exists only at the entrance, a distant square that never seems to grow closer. Preben works carefully. He watches how tools are handled, how carts are loaded, how weight is distributed. Old habits surface even here. A small adjustment saves energy. A pause at the right moment saves fingers. His fear is specific, not death. Hands. At night, lying on a plank bed, he flexes them slowly, counting each finger. He imagines charcoal smudges on paper. He imagines the resistance of a mimeograph crank. He imagines his sister's profile, the line of her nose drawn too sharply because he'd been in a hurry. A fellow prisoner notices. You draw? He asks. Did, Preben answers. There is no more to say. Back in Denmark, Kirsten stops listening for rumors and starts listening for official words. None arrive. She ironed shirts for work, presses them flat until they could belong to anyone. Her brother asks if she's heard anything. She shakes her head and keeps washing dishes, practicing code phrases out of habit even though there is no one left to say them to. Captain Madsen sends inquiries that come back unanswered. He learns which questions attract attention and which disappear. He keeps a private list now, names he remembers without writing down. At home, he teaches his child to tie a shoe knot, looping the laces carefully. Slow, he says, so it holds. In late 1944, a date appears in the records. 22nd of November. No description follows. Just a location reference that shifts depending on which document you read. Porta Westfalica. Or transport back to Nuengami's infirmary. The distinction feels important and impossible to resolve. Preben is 26. What happens next breaks the pattern. Most bodies pass through the crematorium anonymously. Ashes are disposed of, scattered, erased. In this case, someone intervenes. A container is used. Ashes are collected. A tag, or perhaps two, are attached. A name is written down, or a number that later becomes a name. No one records why. I can't pretend I know what it felt like in that room, but I know that exceptions carry weight. Someone decided this person would not dissolve completely into process. After the war, Kirsten stands in line with others, scanning notice boards for lists that keep changing. She looks for his name, then stops looking. It hurts less not to find it when you aren't searching. Preben's sister receives confirmation without details. No coffin, no remains. Only the certainty of loss and the absence of anything to hold. She places his drawing back in the drawer, smoothing the paper as if it might crease itself while she's gone. Years later, His name is carved into the memorial wall reserved for those without graves. The stone is cold under the mason's hand. The spacing is careful, permanent. At the same time, somewhere else, an urn begins a different journey, one no record fully explains. A marked container moves through hands that treat it as evidence, as artifact, as responsibility temporarily assumed. Captain Madsen hears about the carving and closes his ledger for good. He tells himself that names matter, even when bodies don't follow. It is the only way he knows to live with the promises he couldn't keep. The network that once printed words fractures into memory. Survivors argue quietly about what mattered more, what was said or what was never said. Some believe silence was courage. Others believe it was collapse. No one settles the question. What remains certain is this. Preben Holger Larsen dies on paper in 1944. His life is reduced to dates, transfers, a final notation. And yet, somewhere within that system, a choice is made that refuses total erasure. An urn exists. A name stays attached, and the disappearance becomes something slower, heavier, carried forward by procedure, instead of people waiting decades for someone to notice that it does not belong where it is. The review begins the way so many archival projects do, with a deadline and a promise that nothing important will change. In a London storage facility, shelves stretch in long, orderly rows, each box labeled, each object reduced to a line of text. Alexandra Evley moves slowly, camera in one hand, notebook in the other. She photographs labels before touching anything. It's a habit learned the hard way, proof before interpretation. The urn sits low on a shelf, its surface dulled by time. A hairline crack runs down one side, repaired long ago with adhesive that has yellowed. The label is partly detached, curling at the edges. She steadies it with both hands, careful not to tilt it. Human remains, she reads aloud. Then the name. Preben Holger Larsen. She doesn't move for a moment. The room smells faintly of dust and cardboard, the controlled dryness of long-term storage. Her nitrile glove snaps as she adjusts her grip. This shouldn't be here, she says. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to realize an object has been waiting for the wrong person, but I recognize the weight of responsibility when a catalog entry turns into a life. Alexandra photographs the markings, the name, the camp link notation, the accession numbers, layered over one another like sediment. The handwriting changes midway through the label, suggesting different hands at different times. Nothing about it feels intentional enough to trust. Inside, when she carefully peers through the opening, 2 plaster tags are visible among the ash. They clink softly when the urn is moved. Numbers are stamped into them, numbers that don't match what she expects. She makes a note in her book and underlines it twice. The donor file is thin. A British military doctor. Post-war transfer. Institutional handoff. Somewhere along the way, certainty thinned into assumption. An accompanying letter, written decades ago, includes a troubling line. Contents may represent more than one individual. Alexandra closes the file and sits back on her heels. The concrete floor is cold through her trousers. If the label is wrong, she says quietly, someone's grief is wrong. The team gathers later that afternoon, around a table scarred with old tape marks. The urn is not brought out again. They talk instead, voices careful. Do we treat this as an object? One colleague asks, or as a person waiting? No one answers immediately. Alexandra thinks of her mentor, long retired now, who taught her that provenance is a moral claim, that every label asserts a truth someone might build a life around. She flips open her notebook and writes one word: accountability. The next call goes to Denmark. Mikkel Larsen answers his phone at the kitchen table, email already open on his laptop. He checks for updates every morning before work, a habit he can't quite explain to his daughter. Yes, he says, after Alexandra introduces herself. I know the name. He keeps his voice steady. The table is worn smooth where his family has eaten for years. A photograph of the memorial wall lies nearby, creased at one corner from being folded too often. We've had a name, he tells her. We've never had a goodbye. Alexandra explains carefully. A container, a possibility. Uncertainty layered over hope. She does not promise anything. Mikkel listens without interrupting. When she mentions the plaster tags, he exhales slowly. So it might not be him, he says. It might be, she answers. Or it might be complicated. After the call, Mikkel sits with his hands flat on the table, palms down, grounding himself. His daughter comes in, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Any news?" she asks. "Something," he says. "Not everything." End quote. I was not pros about. They have learned to live in that space. Back in London, the urn is reclassified temporarily, flagged for review. Alexandra logs every action. She photographs the interior inventory list. She reties her gloves after they snap and writes down the sound they made, a small detail she doesn't want to forget. The ethical questions arrive faster than the answers. If the remains are commingled, returning them risks closing the wrong story. If they are not returned, the keeping becomes its own decision. A forensic specialist is consulted. DNA is dismissed quickly. Cremation temperatures leave little to work with. Osteological analysis is possible, but limited. The plaster tags become central, their numbers both promising and obstructive. They could be process numbers, the specialist says during a video call. Internal handling identifiers. Or they could indicate multiple individuals. Or later mistakes, Alexandra adds. Or later care, the specialist counters. Someone trying not to lose track. The room falls quiet. Alexandra looks at the empty space on the shelf, where the urn will soon no longer sit, one way or another. "I can't pretend I know how it feels to decide whether hope is kinder than caution, but I can see the strain in choosing between them when no option is clean." In Denmark, Mikkel visits London again. He runs his finger along the carved letters, reading them the way he always has, as if repetition might turn them into something else. The wall was built for those without graves. It has rules. It has order. "What happens if his name moves?" his daughter asks. "I don't know," he says. "Maybe the wall stays the same. Maybe we read it differently." He takes a photo and sends it to Alexandra, unprompted. She saves it to the case file, not as evidence, but as context. Weeks pass in careful motion, meetings, emails, documentation. The urn remains untouched, its contents intact, its meaning suspended. Alexandra writes a report that refuses certainty where it doesn't exist. She uses phrases like balance of probability and ethical obligation. She avoids words that might harden into conclusions. When she finally stands in the storage room again, she places her hand on the shelf beside the urn, not on it. "The metal is cold. We won't let you stay lost in here," she says softly. It is not a promise of outcome, only of attention. The decision to proceed toward repatriation is conditional, layered with safeguards. Denmark is notified. Family consent is sought with full disclosure of doubt. The urn is treated not as a solved case, but as a responsibility transferred. Mikkel checks his email every morning. Some days there is nothing. Some days there is a paragraph that changes the shape of the future, just enough to notice. At the museum, Alexandra closes the accession log for the day and places her notebook back in her bag. The space on the shelf remains occupied for now, but it feels temporary. A container that traveled without meaning has been noticed. A name carved for those without graves has been spoken aloud in rooms that never expected it. The work is not finished. It may never be finished in the way people hope. But something has shifted from quiet keeping to deliberate care. And that, for now, is enough to move forward. The first rule Alexandra insists on is restraint. No opening the urn until every protocol is agreed upon. No assumptions written into the paperwork. No language that promises what the evidence cannot yet support. The object has waited long enough. It does not need haste now. The forensic laboratory smells faintly of disinfectant and warm electronics. Stainless steel surfaces reflect light without giving anything back. When the urn finally arrives, padded and escorted, it is treated with the same procedural care as a fragile artifact, because it is one and because it is not. Dr. Nicholas Marquez Grant stands a step back, hands folded, eyes on the container. He has spent decades working with human remains, but cremated material always gives him pause. "Fire erases stories," he says, then leaves fragments that argue with each other. In Nationa's woes, they document everything before a single grain is disturbed. Photographs from every angle. Measurements of the crack in the ceramic. Notes on the adhesive repair post-war, not contemporary with the original firing. Someone tried to keep the vessel intact long after its first purpose ended. When the lid is lifted, there is no dramatic reveal. Just ash, gray and uneven, heavier in some areas than others. Bone fragments appear among it, warped and chalky, the result of extreme heat. The two plaster tags lie near the top, their edges worn smooth by movement. Alexandra exhales slowly. Her gloves snap as she adjusts them. "These are real," she says, unnecessarily. Dr. Marquez Grant nods. "Human," he confirms, gently, without question. "I can't pretend I know what it feels like to stand over the remains of someone whose life you've only met through labels and lists, but I recognize the care that shows up when certainty is dangerous." The plaster tags are examined first. Each carries a number 1832 and 1276 pressed in before the plaster set. They are not identical in size or thickness. One is more worn than the other, its edges softened as if it was handled more often. "These aren't prisoner numbers," Alexandra says. "No." Marquez Grant agrees. "But that doesn't mean they're meaningless." They spread archival documents across the table. Crematorium procedures, camp records, post-war handling notes. Nguyengamy's system used internal process numbers to track bodies through the cremation workflow numbers that never appeared in prisoner files. In some cases, multiple numbers could be associated with a single individual: intake, cremation order, ash handling. In theory, Marquez Grant says, 2 tags could represent 2 steps, or 2 people. The room goes quiet at that. Alexandra writes both possibilities down, side by side, refusing to privilege one over the other. Her mentor's voice echoes in memory. "Provenance is a moral claim. If they choose wrong, the harm will not be abstract." The osteological analysis proceeds slowly. Fragments are sorted by size and density. Heat distortion patterns are compared. There is no duplication of certain bone types that would conclusively indicate multiple individuals, but cremation complicates everything. High temperatures can reduce distinctiveness to coincidence. "Nothing here contradicts the idea of a single adult male," Marquez Grant says carefully. "Nothing here confirms it beyond doubt either." "So we're balanced," Alexander says. "Balanced on probability," he corrects, "not proof." They return to the donor note, the line that has haunted the case from the beginning. "May contain remains of more than one individual." The phrasing is cautious, almost defensive. It does not explain how the donor knew this, or whether it was speculation. "People write warnings when they're unsure," Alexandra says, "or when they're afraid of being wrong, or when they want to be protected from responsibility." The question of who labeled the urn becomes central. The handwriting on the name does not match the hand that wrote the accession number. The camp notation appears earlier, more hurried. Someone added, someone amended, someone preserved. "Labels accrete," Marquez Grant says, "like stories." In Denmark, Mikkel waits. He checks his email each morning before coffee, phone face down on the counter, until he's ready. Some days, Alexandra's messages are technical, careful. Some days, they are human. "We found the tags. They don't resolve things cleanly. I'm sorry." He forwards one message to his daughter with a single line, "Still working." At Minde, London, he stands between the wall and the graves, feeling the difference under his feet. Stone on one side, grass on the other. The wall was built to hold names without bodies. The graves hold bodies with names fixed above them. He has lived his life on the wall side. "What if it's not him?" his daughter asks quietly. "Then we don't pretend it is," he says. "We don't borrow certainty." Back in the lab, the team debates language. Is versus likely? Identified versus attributed. Words become tools, sharp enough to cut if used carelessly. Alexandra argues for transparency over reassurance. "If we send him home," she says, "it has to be with the doubt intact." Marquez Grant agrees. "Ethics isn't about removing discomfort," he says. "It's about carrying it honestly." They draft a conclusion that refuses to close the case neatly, based on the name on the urn, the documented provenance from Nguyengamby, the absence of contradictory remains, and the historical context. The balance of probability supports attribution to Preben Holger Larsen, not certainty. Attribution. "I can't pretend I know how heavy that distinction feels to a family, but I can see how necessary it is when the past has already taken so much." The institutions involved review the findings. Legal teams weigh in. Cultural authorities in Denmark are consulted. Everyone asks the same question in different language. Is this enough? Alexandra answers the same way each time. It's the most honest answer we have. The decision is made collectively. Repatriation will proceed, with full documentation of uncertainty. The urn will not be relabeled to erase the doubt. The plaster tags will be included in the record, not hidden away as inconvenient details. When Alexandra tells Mikkel, she does not rush. "This doesn't give you everything," she says over the phone. "But it gives you a place to stand." He closes his eyes. The kitchen smells of toast and coffee. His daughter sits across from him, watching his face. "We can live with that," he says. "We've lived with less." Before the urn leaves the lab, Alexandra spends a moment alone with it. She does not touch it. She reads the name again, traces the crack with her eyes. "We did what we could," she says quietly. The forensic file is closed, not because the questions are gone, but because the responsibility has shifted, from analysis to action, from shelves to soil. What remains unresolved does not disappear. It travels forward, carried openly this time, attached to the truth that science could approach but not dominate. And in that careful balance, a decision is made that changes where a name will be read and how a family will learn to hold both doubt and return in the same hands. The story everyone expects to explain this moment is a simple one. A family was contacted after the war, and they could not bear to receive what was left. It is repeated often because it feels humane. Pain explains delay. Trauma explains distance. No one has to be at fault. But when Alexandra begins laying the documents side by side, dates, addresses, routing stamps, the story starts to loosen. The British military doctor's name appears first in the chain. Frederick Murgatroyd, summer of 1945. Northern Germany. A liberated camp landscape still heavy, with the smell of burned brick and wet ash. Murgatroyd is a medical officer, trained to catalog bodies, injuries, conditions that refuse neat endings. He encounters the urn during clearance work, tagged, named, intact. What he thinks in that moment is not recorded. He may have been trying to protect it, Alexandra says later, carefully. Or trying to keep it. Both can be true at once. Murgatroyd brings the urn back to Britain. There is no formal repatriation file attached to it. No shipping manifest addressed to Denmark. The transfer looks provisional, like something meant to be decided later. Later stretches. The next piece of evidence is quieter. An institutional note, years afterward, stating that the family did not wish to receive the remains. Mikkel reads that line on his laptop at the kitchen table, the cursor blinking beneath it. His daughter watches him from across the room, pretending to do homework. "Did they?" she asks. "I don't know," he says. "I honestly don't know. If you every probable being honor." The phrasing bothers him. Did not wish. It sounds like a decision. It sounds like a choice clearly offered and clearly refused. But no letter to his grandmother survives. No record of a phone call. No receipt acknowledging contact. Only the statement that something was declined. "I can't pretend I know what it feels like to inherit a sentence that rewrites your family's past, but I know how heavy it is when certainty arrives without proof." Alexandra follows the trail backward. In 1945, Denmark is overwhelmed. Records are incomplete. Addresses have changed. People have been displaced, killed, moved in ways no registry kept up with. Preben's sister is alive then, teaching, holding together a life with gaps she does not talk about. If a message came, it may not have reached her. If it reached her, it may have been framed impossibly. An urn from a camp, no guarantee of contents, no explanation of process. If it asked for consent, it may not have waited long for an answer, or it may never have been asked at all. Mikkel imagines his great-aunt standing at the kitchen table, the drawer with Preben's drawings nearby, a letter in her hand that does not explain itself. He imagines her folding it once, then again, placing it with the others. But imagination is not evidence, and the truth is thinner than any of them would like. What is clear is this: after 1945, the urn stays in Britain. Murgatroyd keeps it until his death. His widow donates his collection to a medical institution, and the urn follows the logic of objects, not people. It is catalogued, stored, moved. It survives because it is labeled. It waits because no one is looking for it. In Denmark, the memorial wall at Minde, London, is completed with intention. It is meant for those without graves. Preben's name is carved there, fixed among others whose bodies will never be returned. The stone is a decision made in good faith, based on the information available. Preben's sister visits the site once, then stops. She keeps his drawings in a drawer, never framed. She never throws out the last envelope with his handwriting. When asked about him, she says very little. He liked to work with his hands, she tells a neighbor once. Nothing more. Years later, Mikkel grows up walking past the wall on school trips, the teacher's voices dropping in volume as they approach it. He learns to read names there like coordinates. He learns that some questions are not asked because there is nowhere to send them. When Alexandra presents the new findings to Danish authorities, she refuses to smooth the edges. There is a gap, she says plainly. We cannot say the family refused. We can only say the urn did not return. One official nods slowly. Those are different statements, he says. They are. The memorial wall becomes a point of tension. It was built to hold Preben's name because there was nowhere else to put it. If the urn is returned now, the wall must change, or the meaning of the wall must. Are we allowed to move a name? Someone asks. Mikkel answers that question later, standing with his daughter before the stone. We don't move the past, he says. We add to it. It is all of 1807 Brest. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to renegotiate a place of mourning that has shaped your whole life, but I can see how careful people become when they realize memory has architecture. The ethical weight shifts again. If the urn contains more than one person, returning it under Preben's name risks collapsing other lives into his. If it does not return, Preben remains a name without a body, despite evidence that one may exist. Alexandra argues that the harm of endless keeping is no longer theoretical. Every year it stayed, she says, was a decision. Just not one anyone admitted to making. The institutions agree. Not because the case is perfect, but because inaction has become its own form of possession. Mikkel sits with the decision longer than anyone expects. He calls relatives. He reads the reports again. He stands at the wall at Minde, London, and presses his palm flat against the stone. We've had a name, he says aloud, to no one in particular. We've never had a goodbye. That sentence becomes the hinge. Consent is given, with conditions. The uncertainty must travel with the urn. The story must be told whole, including what cannot be resolved. The family will not pretend the doubt does not exist. Alexandra feels the shift immediately. Responsibility turns into preparation. Paperwork becomes logistics. The urn is no longer an item under review but a person in transit. Before the transfer, she spends time with the original container again. The crack has widened slightly. The adhesive has failed in places. It has done as much holding as it can. This isn't a failure, she tells a colleague. It's evidence. In Denmark, Minde London prepares quietly. No announcements yet, no ceremony scheduled. The wall still reads the same. Mikkel tells his daughter they may soon have somewhere else to stand. Will it be strange? She asks. Yes, he says. But strange isn't bad. The truth, when it finally takes shape, is not about how Preben died. That question remains narrow, technical, unresolved. The truth is about why he did not come home, and how easily the end of a war can still leave people misplaced. What failed was not care, but clarity. Not intention, but follow-through. The war ended, the keeping continued. And now, with full knowledge of what cannot be known, a family and a set of institutions agree to stop waiting for a cleaner answer. They choose return, not as resolution, but as responsibility finally claimed. The return does not begin with a ceremony. It begins with packing. In London, the urn is wrapped in layers of archival foam and placed inside a transport case designed for objects that cannot be replaced. A registrar from the museum checks the seals twice, then a third time, fingers moving slowly, deliberately. The original container is too damaged to travel safely. The crack along its side has widened. The old adhesive no longer holds. So, a decision is made that feels symbolic even as it is practical. The contents are transferred. Alexandra watches as the ash and fragments are moved into a new urn plane, stable, made to endure burial rather than storage. The old urn is set aside, empty now, tagged not as remains but as evidence. 2 vessels, 2 rolls. One held him, the registrar says quietly. One will bring him home. I can't pretend I know what it feels like to separate a person from the object that carried them for decades, but I understand the care in treating neither as disposable. The old urn will stay in London, catalogued honestly this time. Witness object, provenance artifact, proof of a decision delayed, and then corrected. The new urn is sealed, documented, and cleared for travel. At the airport, there are no uniforms of honor, no flags. Just careful hands and quiet paperwork. The case is handled the way rare paintings are handled, because that is the closest system anyone has for transporting something both fragile and irreplaceable. Alexandra signs the final release form. Her pen hesitates for a fraction of a second over the name. "Goodbye," she says, under her breath. In Copenhagen, Mikkel waits with his phone on the table, face down. He has learned not to watch the clock. His daughter sits nearby, scrolling without seeing. When the message comes arrived, he closes his eyes. They go to London together that afternoon. Before the ceremony, before anything official changes. The wall looks the same as it always has. Names carved in rows, cold stone. The place built for those without graves. Mikkel runs his finger over Preben's name, the habit automatic. "This is where he's been," his daughter says. "Yes," he answers. "And this is where he won't only be." The burial date is not chosen for convenience. It is chosen for meaning. The 29th of August, 79 years earlier, the Danish government resigned rather than submit fully to German demands. The resistance moved from shadow to confrontation. Preben helped name a paper after that date. It became a line he crossed, knowingly. Now, the calendar folds back on itself. The ceremony is small, contained, respectful. No speeches that pretend to solve anything. The urn is carried to the KZ section, where other resistance fighters returned from camps were buried after the war. 31 graves already stand there, names aligned, ground settled. Mikkel stands in two places that day, first at the wall, then at the grave. The distance between them is not far, but it feels like crossing something internal. "This is his place," his daughter says, more statement than question. "Yes," he replies, "and the wall stays too." The name is not erased from stone. It is contextualized. Records are updated. Visitors will now learn that one name once thought lost was found late, returned imperfectly, but returned. Alexandra watches from a few steps back. She does not approach the family. This is not her moment to occupy. She notices small details instead. The sound of gravel under shoes, the way the urn is lowered slowly, the steadiness of the hands holding it. "I can't pretend I know what it feels like to finish a case that never truly closes, but I recognize the quiet that comes when responsibility has been carried as far as it can go." The urn is placed. Soil follows. A marker will come later. No one mentions the plaster tags aloud, but they are present in the file, in the understanding shared by those who agreed to be here honestly. Uncertainty is not banished. It is acknowledged and set down with care. Afterward, Mikkel and his daughter walk back to the wall one last time. "Do you think there are others?" she asks. "Still waiting somewhere?" He nods. "I think there must be." To Krasicide. Numb, he takes out the photograph he's carried for years, the one of the wall with Preben's name creased at the corner. He looks at it, then folds it and puts it away. "We'll come back," he says. But now we have somewhere else too. In London, the empty space on the shelf remains. Alexandra closes the archive box that once held the urn. The absence is visible now, and that matters. She writes the final line in her notebook, returned, with doubt intact. It is not a triumphant ending. It is a responsible one. What remains is not just ash and soil, but a changed obligation for families, for institutions, for anyone who assumes the war ended cleanly. Preben Holger Larsen does not come back whole. No one does. But he is no longer only a name held in place by stone and waiting. He is also a grave you can stand beside, knowing exactly what was found, what was lost, and what it took decades later for someone to finally say, "This does not belong on a shelf." On a quiet afternoon, Mikkel's daughter moves between two places that once could not coexist. She traces Preben Holger Larsen's name on the memorial wall, stone worn smooth by decades of fingers, then walks to the grave, where soil is still darker than the ground around it. She touches the marker, then looks back at the wall. "They're both his," she says. "I can't pretend I know what it's like to inherit a history that shifts under your feet, but I can see what it offers now. A choice about how to remember." In London, Alexandra Evley locks a storage room and pauses in front of the shelf that is finally empty. The absence is deliberate. It means something moved, not just in space, but in responsibility. The battered notebook in her bag still smells faintly of graphite and old paper. One case is closed. The shelves remain full. Preben's life does not return. His plans do not resume. The studio never opens. The portraits are never painted. What returns instead is permission for grief to take form, for a family to stop explaining why there was nowhere to go. The urn did not solve the past. It changed the present. Somewhere, other names still sit misfiled, written in hands that thought they were being careful. This story does not promise they will all be found. It only insists that when they are, someone must be willing to notice and to act. A name on a wall can last forever. A place in the ground gives it weight. Between the two, a life is finally allowed to rest imperfectly, honestly, and at last, at home.